Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome your Jack Kemp Foundation President, Jimmy Kemp.
But we have a short video welcoming or saying hello to you all from Senator Tim Scott. So ladies and gentlemen, Tim Scott.
Hey everyone, it is great to be with the Kemp Forum again. I've known Jimmy for years and cannot thank him enough for everything the group does. I was fortunate enough to have taken part in the first forum a few years ago right in my backyard of South Carolina. And it is just fantastic to see how the platform has grown and how real change is coming to American families because of the efforts of Jimmy Kemp and the Kemp Forum. A few months ago, I launched my National Opportunity Tour in my hometown, North Charleston, South Carolina. And last month, I visited with Marco Rubio, Miami, his hometown, and we made a few stops to talk about the importance of the opportunity zones. Just like the discussions that are happening today, we are sitting down with state and local leaders to bring opportunities to millions of folks living in distressed communities. My goal has been simple: figure out what's working, what isn't working, so we can keep finding innovative solutions to fighting poverty. One of the initiatives I was able to get passed in the tax bill was my Investing in Opportunity Act. It aims to incentivize investment in our most distressed communities so we can help millions of Americans gain access to the American dream. We want to provide a bridge of opportunity to families to succeed in high potential neighborhoods because our communities win and America wins when that happens. I look forward to working with you all as we encourage investment in our communities and get the right thing done for hard-working Americans. Thank you, and I hope you have an amazing forum.
So, as Speaker Ryan said, the genesis of opportunity zones was something called enterprise zones. And just because it's been talked about so much today, and some of the takeaways from today are not only the people, the organizations, the chess players who you will meet, but we also want some tangible policy things that you all can take back and figure out how to participate and get capital into our distressed communities. So I want to put up a couple slides quickly before I bring up the next panel on the Opportunity Zone legislation. And what you see on the screen is Chicago, and the deep dark red is the most distressed areas of Chicago according to a bunch of metrics. You may disagree with the metrics, but you can go in and go to eig.org, Economic Innovation Group, and find this presentation. And so the way that opportunity zones are supposed to work, as you heard, distressed communities are going to be identified by states, and you all need to be a part of that conversation. You need to be talking with the state, finding out where the census tracts are, and so the qualified opportunity zone areas are being released during 2018, and the Treasury and the states are involved in that process. And the next slide is what the Opportunity Zone is about. So the Opportunity Zone program offers investors 3 incentives for putting capital to work, rebuilding economically distressed communities. You've got a temporary deferral of capital gains until 2026. So you can put unrealized gains into a fund and you won't be taxed on those. A fund that is created to invest in distressed communities won't be taxed on those funds until 2026, encouraging long-term investment. A reduction, the original amount of capital gains on which an investor has to pay deferred taxes is reduced, so the basis is raised, and the opportunity investment is held for 5 years, another 5% if it's held for 7 years. Again, you see the incentive to stay invested. And then you've got an exemption. Any capital gains on investments made through the Opportunity Fund accrue tax-free. So when you're investing in the community, you find the people who have an idea in a community and you invest in it, and they make money and you make money, that money's capital gains tax-free. So those are the basics. There's a lot more information. And our next panel is going to talk about opportunity zones and ways to get capital into distressed communities. I would like to start by introducing Andrea Zopp from World Business Chicago, and you can see her bio in the program. And as Andrea comes out, I would love to have Andrea say hello to you all and answer a question. The question for Andrea that I want her to answer for you all is, what makes her heart beat fast? I want you to know a little bit about the personality of each person who comes up on stage. So Andrea, thank you for being here, and please come share what makes your heart beat fast. Welcome, Andrea Zopp.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm making you walk all over the stage.
Exactly. It's good. I don't mind walking all over the stage.
Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. So what makes my heart beat fast? As I have been working in, I feel really blessed. I don't come from Chicago. I grew up in upstate New York. My parents my father was the first African-American judge on the bench in Rochester. My mother worked in HR, but they were very committed to the community. But they had doors, they fought hard to open doors for me, doors to quality education, doors to introduction for jobs, and that helped me, and lots of other people have helped that. And so what I'm passionate about and what gets me up is making sure that those doors that we're fighting, that those of us who have opportunity are fighting, open those doors for others, because there's a lot of barriers in front of people. It's why I've spent a lot of time in all kinds of appointed roles, everything from health and hospital systems in Chicago to the school board in Chicago. I ran the Urban League, and now I'm working at World Business Chicago, where we're working to grow Chicago, but also working to take the growth that's happening in the central business district and organically in parts of Chicago, and pushing it into areas where it is not happening organically. And I'm passionate about that, and I'm passionate about this city. It's a fabulous city. It's growing, it's vibrant, it's diverse, it's easy to live in, it's innovative and original. And so those are the things that make me jump up in the morning, living in Chicago, helping to grow Chicago, but helping to make sure that people who don't not had the opportunity that I have had get those opportunities, and that we can get away from the idea that this is two cities, one for people who live in some parts of the community and one who live in others. So thank you. I'm thrilled to be here to introduce my panel, which is what I'm supposed to do now. So first, Congressman Peter Roskam is with us this morning from the House and Ways and Means Committee. Margaret Anadu, who is the head of Goldman Sachs Urban Investment Group. Dave Dillon, who is the founder of Dillon Kane. And Ed Monser, the president of Emerson Electric Company. Everybody, let's have a seat. So I told everybody on my panel that I was going to do to them what was done to me. And so I'd like everybody, we're just going to start and run down the panel. Let's talk just briefly about what gets you up in the morning, what are you passionate about, and what gets you running. So Congressman Roskam.
I'm passionate about recognizing where we are in history, and that 50 years from now, social scientists and economic historians are going to have a field day with us, because we're in the midst of choosing in this country between two views of the economy that are competing for the affections of the American people. One view is a zero-sum game of the economy that says if somebody is successful, it comes at the demise of somebody else. That's a disaster, but it's tempting. The other view says let's pursue growth. And growth is good. Growth inures to the benefit of the community, and we've got to be sensible so that everybody can participate in that growth. But we are in the midst of that discussion right now. And those two choices are going to, I think, have an impact for the next century. And it's not often that a generation gets to see its decisions that have a generational impact like this debate that we're having right now.
So, thank you. Margaret?
So what actually gets me up in the morning is not always what I'm passionate about. So what gets me up in the morning is my 1-year-old, without much choice about what hour that occurs. And what I'm passionate about is neighborhoods and cities. I have the pleasure of getting to invest capital in distressed neighborhoods, and I'm passionate about watching the way that private capital can make a difference. And I like your point about not having a zero-sum game, that these neighborhoods can improve and people can have real opportunities at the expense of no one else.
Dave?
Yes, I'm passionate about lots of things. one of the main things that I love to do is to see people connect who don't normally have the chance to connect. And we formed an organization called Together Chicago. It's based on kind of the passions of a group of leaders in Chicago who have come together over the last year in particular. And we're forming conversations that just haven't happened before. For example, I've gotten to know some of the leading African-American pastors on the South Side, men like Bishop Horace Smith and Dr. Charlie Dates, who are just giants in the community, are well known and esteemed, and connecting them with business leaders and other white church leaders to really work on the problems of Chicago. And we'll talk more about some of what we're doing there. But that's what I'm passionate about.
Terrific. Ed?
Yeah, working with the Urban League in St. Louis, the question that keeps coming up is, we'll have a 25-year-old young man walk in to our Ferguson Community Center and say, I'm screwed. And what do you tell him? And what do you suggest for the next steps and how to make progress with that? And it's amazing how many times every day that happens. And so how do you answer that question when it gets asked? And the important thing, they're asking the question. So they're saying, I need something new, I need something different. How do you answer that?
So let me just stay with you on that. How are you? You've done some things, you changed some of the ways that Emerson was thinking about with their giving. So let's talk a little bit about what you think you can do, what you're doing in the role that you're in to address that question. Is there a place for corporate business?
Right. Well, Emerson's a pretty large manufacturing company, around since 1890, headquartered in Ferguson, Missouri. And I used to say I'm from St. Louis. Now, most of the time I say I'm from Ferguson because you get a whole different reaction. And we've been headquartered in Ferguson since 1938. So we've been there a long time. And when Michael Brown was shot and killed, 3 days after that, we had a discussion at our headquarters and said we give $25 to $30 million every year for the last 10 years to the St. Louis community. How is that money being used? Where is it going? And those kinds of questions. And it goes to Washington. It was going to Washington University, a very fine institution, St. Louis University, the orchestra, the zoo, a number of hospitals. How much of it's going to Ferguson? And we did not like the answer because the answer was virtually nothing. And that's the neighborhood that we're in. That's where we live, how we feel. And I'm not dislike a lot of other executives, I don't think. I didn't start out as an executive. I started out somewhere else. But I get up and get in my car in my garage in Ladue and drive to Ferguson and park in my garage at headquarters and do my job and go home, and all of a sudden Ferguson blows up. And we didn't like the fact it was zero. So we had to redirect and say, where are we going to put the money? The first thing we learned was, unlike other parts of St. Louis, in North County and in Ferguson, there's not really a bunch of institutions you can go write a check to and walk away. If you're going to do something in Ferguson, you have to participate. You have to get involved. You have to be directly involved. And so we decided to put money into a handful of things. I and others were shocked to realize, and we didn't know, we should have known, no preschools in Ferguson. We got a 60% dropout rate in the high school, but no preschools. When did that happen? How did that happen? So we helped start a couple preschools, so that's a good thing. The big thing that came out of the Ferguson study was the overwhelming economic hopelessness of the area and how important jobs are, and how important jobs are for an 18 to 23-year-old that's never had a job. And so we participate in a first job program. So we've now got 350 people identified and through the program. First job is we'll work with the individual and we'll work with the company, and Emerson will pay the salary for the first 6 months for that person to work in that job, just to generate first jobs for people, build a resume, get an experience. 75% of those people kept their job at the 6-month point. And then on the night of the non-indictment of the policeman who shot Michael Brown, another traumatic series of events, 190 businesses on the perimeter of Emerson's campus were on fire. And those businesses need to rebuild and stuff, so we actually assigned people to work with, because the next day the insurance company, God bless them, comes in and says, here's the paperwork, please sign this, and then we'll take care of you. And somebody's got to read the form, to say, don't sign it yet. You'd be smart to negotiate and talk and, get through that coaching. So we did that. And then the last thing was scholarships. And what we have learned is giving scholarships for engineering is a beautiful thing. You take a smart kid from Ferguson and send him to engineering school. There's only one thing wrong with that program. As soon as they get that engineering degree, they do not come back to Ferguson. And Ferguson does not get any better. But we also learned if you take somebody and they learn how to be a technician, a welder, a carpenter, an IT specialist, they stay in Ferguson. And so we coupled that with Rankin Technical College, where I also get to do a bunch of work, which is a fabulous school. 5.5 job offers for every graduate that comes out. The last 2 years, starting pay, if you graduate from Rankin Technical College, $42,000. That's higher than University of Missouri Columbia for new grad pay. The average family of 4 in Ferguson makes $23,000. We can graduate 200 a year technicians and sustain it for a decade. We can make an economic impact in Ferguson. Right. And so that's the kind of redirect. Then rebuild the urban center where the Quick Trip burned down and put in a community center. We helped with that. And then the other thing that kind of closed the loop, we're in the middle of making a decision to build a new factory, to build modular control rooms, and we were going to build that factory in Texas. And maybe we should put the factory in Ferguson.
Yeah, right.
So we put the factory in Ferguson, and it's now been running 3 years, and we're now to the point where we're hiring the technicians from Rankin to work in the factory. The kids from Ferguson are home with a better job that's close, and they don't have to go somewhere else. So those are the kind of things.
Wow. Right. So I'm going to move on, but I just want to, because I want to make sure we get these points. There's some incredibly powerful points that you said there. First of all, the disinvestment earlier wasn't intentional. It was just lack of focus. So you changed your focus when you saw. Second of all, the incredible role that business can play when they choose to make a role. You're changing that community. The impact of the point about so many of our young people, it's not that they choose to be violent, it's not that they choose, it's that they're hopeless. And that a real job with a pathway to wealth and the ability to support yourself can make a huge difference in life. And the final thing is keeping that wealth in Ferguson, right? Keeping so that you can uplift the whole community. It was a really powerful story with some really important lessons when we're talking about community change. Congressman Roskam, I'd like to turn to you and talk a little bit about the role of government. What can Washington do really to help on this issue?
Well, it's been interesting to go through the debate on tax policy, and there's been proponents and there's been opponents of tax policy, as we've seen a very robust debate. But there's no opponents to the idea of the opportunity zones. And I think therein lies a federal policy that can induce behavior. So if Emerson is looking with intentionality and fear and fire coming upon its boundaries that have really created a motivation, there's others that don't have that experience that are basically looking out over a landscape and saying where can I deploy capital so in ways that make sense. Jimmy, in the introduction, Jimmy Kemp, articulated the parameters of this, but these opportunity zones, you'll basically find no critics of it. And I think that this is an area where both sides, regardless of worldview, even if you're a zero-sum game view of the economy, you can come in and you can celebrate an opportunity zone. And so what it's trying to do is literally to create an environment where capital is deployed, capital then is rewarded in a way that wouldn't happen absent a favorable tax environment. And so I think that what is now beginning to happen is states across the country, governors, are identifying these zones and saying this is an area where we're going to create this favorable disposition in terms of tax treatment, encouraging on a tax-deferred basis, encouraging other investments to come in favorably. If they roll them over and they put them into the Opportunity Fund within 180 days, it's not a taxable event. And then ultimately, if we're trying to create and mirror what was just described in Ferguson, that is long-term investment, to make it not a taxable event at all if the capital is deployed for a decade. Because at that point, you can say the pump has been primed and action begets action, and I think that creates a virtuous cycle.
What do you worry about in terms of risks to the program not working the way that it's intended to accomplish the objectives that you're talking about?
So anytime federal lawmakers or anybody tries to come up with a policy, there's things can always be subject to manipulation. They can always be subject to abuse. So what we've got to make sure is that it's not manipulated, excuse me, somehow, that it's not abused somehow. If there is a way to do it, that we learn about it quickly and we mitigate that and correct it. Here's what we don't want to have happen. We don't want people to become just complete cynics about this whole thing, because cynicism is a pretty dark brew, and we don't want to start sipping on that cup because it really doesn't end well.
So the other point that I would encourage you to think about is how Congress supports telling the stories of what happens, right? Because I think people here, much like the Emerson story, Ed's story, I don't think many people in Ferguson may know, but I don't think it's more broadly known, and it's a very powerful story. Same thing with once these investments happen, because the point is letting people know this is how it's working, because right now it's a really interesting government plan, and you know how the cynicism is to that. So I think we all need to think about how we tell the story, not only once it happened, but of how it works and the change that should come. So
the challenge, and I accept the admonition, and you're completely right. The challenge that we have in this environment is that we are short attention span people. And the ability to tell a longer story, a cause and effect, is something that we all, and I'm communicating this generally, we all need to be more disciplined about that and not be defensive to say, no, the reason that this investment took place in the first place was based on this policy. So I take your point, but it's a larger cultural challenge that we have in how we communicate, I think.
Margaret, speaking of telling stories, I think you've got the work that you're doing in the Urban Investment Group at Goldman Sachs is something that many people here might not know about. And so why don't you share a little bit about what you're doing, what Goldman is supporting, and why?
Sure. And it's funny, Speaker Ryan did a lot of the work earlier. So a lot of the tools that he was talking about earlier, so new markets tax credits, social impact bonds, and opportunity zones are the type of tools my team uses every day. So the group started back at Goldman about 17 years ago. It was a very small effort at the time to invest capital in distressed neighborhoods in a way that not only created real demonstrable impact for the families in those neighborhoods, but also did it while creating a real financial return. And so we were, investing $5-10 million a year at the time, and today we're investing $1 billion a year all around the country, and we've learned a lot of lessons along the way. And I think most important, especially as we think about things like opportunity zones, we've found that having a real place-based approach and doing that in partnership with local communities, be it the public sector, so the economic development agencies, the mayors, and also the not-for-profits, and I think earlier they were called the poverty fighters in these neighborhoods, are what's really important. Because we've found that what we're doing in Newark, New Jersey, and the types of investments we're making there, they're very different from what we're doing in central Brooklyn, or even some of the investments we've started to look at the south side of Chicago, because the needs are different. And so thinking about something like opportunity zones, we are excited that that's been written with a lot of flexibility, because things can sometimes get a little too prescriptive and not necessarily work for all of the communities and all the needs that are out there. But we also, I share your view about, telling those stories and being, even Goldman Sachs, we're thinking about exactly how we want to share the intention of those investments, be very clear and upfront with why we're making the investments we're making and the impacts that we think are going to be achieved from it, and also at the end of the day, whether those impacts were achieved or not. So I'm just thinking about some of the stories we like to tell today. So Chicago is one of the cities where we've invested a ton in our 10,000 Small Businesses initiative. So as we at a place like Goldman, we're in the business of economic progress and growth. And we think that some of the real anchors of that growth in neighborhoods all around the country, but especially some of these distressed neighborhoods, are the small business owners. And so we created a program that provides a practical business education. So, the brilliant empanada maker in the Bronx, they might be brilliant in making empanadas, they're delicious, but they haven't had a course in, how to apply for a contract, or, how to work with lawyers, or how to create a growth plan. And so we created an education, almost a mini MBA, if you will, to give those practitioners some real expertise there. And then also the access to capital piece. So we've also provided at this point, I think, 6,000 or 7,000 of those same business owners who've been through the education portion, that loan that they need to grow, to open that next facility, or most importantly in a lot of these neighborhoods, to hire that next worker. So that's something we're really, really excited about, and we think there might be some overlay with opportunity zones there. And then the $1 billion that we invest every year, it's real place-based work. So affordable housing, schools, grocery stores, healthcare facilities. These neighborhoods need, it's not a one-shot thing. It's a real holistic, comprehensive approach. And we've seen that, for example, Harlem, we've been investing there for 10 years. Newark, New Jersey, same thing. And we've seen real change. So Newark, for example, when we started investing there, unemployment was, 15%. It's down to 8%. Now that's still twice the national average, but we're seeing the progress there. Camden, New Jersey, we've invested a lot in some really strong not-for-profit educational institutions there. When we started investing in Camden, New Jersey, there was one year where literally in the entire city, there were only 3 students in high school who were, scored college ready on those exams. Well, that's not a recipe for success. But we've seen that change. We're seeing those graduation rates tick up. So we're seeing that capital can make a real difference, and we just need to be able to be humble and listen to the community stakeholders, make the investments that are going to be the most impactful, but also do it in a way that's fiscally responsible, so we can continue to make those investments as we generate those returns.
Thank you. Dave, so you said earlier that your what gives you passion is connecting people that make a difference. Tell us a little bit about how those connections are turning into impact in the community.
Thank you. Yeah, what we found, and just quickly my background, I actually grew up overseas and arrived in the U.S. in '73. So when the Fair Housing Act was done in 1968, I didn't know anything about it. And I got to Chicago and started learning about some of the inequities that had happened in the city of Chicago for decades. And it really appalled me and concerned me, and that kind of got me involved in the inner city in a variety of different ways. My day job, I'm a tech entrepreneur. I run 9 software businesses, and they've grown and they're doing nicely. But my passion has increasingly been this conversation that I mentioned. And one way to talk about that is the notion of collective impact. And collective impact is bringing people together who don't normally have these conversations. And one community in particular that I feel has not talked to each other very much is the faith community and the business community. So there's a number of examples of ways that we're trying to facilitate that. For example, on the south side, we've brought together a coalition of people, private equity business owners, investors, churches, who are now talking about very specific actions we can take together as a coalition. So one specific thing is we're finding businesses where CEOs like Ed, who I'm so impressed with, we need more of those. There's some like that in Chicago, actually. And we're working with some of those. There's one company here, I'm not going to say the name of the business, but it's a very large corporation that spends $500 million every year in their supply chain. That's outside of their salaries. And they've given us access to all their information about how they spend their money. And they said, we want to spend that money in the community as much as we can. So let's look at that. Are there categories in there that we could redirect that into the south or the west sides? So we're working very closely with them. So that's a partnership where we need to understand, like you were saying, who are the great entrepreneurs in the community? Well, the churches often are the place where those are known, right? So we're talking to the pastors to say, who do you know who's great at doing, who's a great attorney, who's a great CPA, who's a great landscaper? How can we get them great economic opportunities in the community that they wouldn't have had before? Another example is in housing. We want to create beautiful homes that are really not in the normal term of low-income housing or Section 8 housing. We want people to own property, to form equity. That's the generational wealth transfer that we've all found, right? At least I've benefited from that. And we want that to be everyone having that opportunity. So we're looking to build very high-quality homes at the lowest possible price to get people into those homes, and they get the benefit of that equity wealth transfer. So we have some banking partners we're working with. So another, like Fifth Third Bank has been a great partner of ours, and we're very happy with that. So there's just a lot of things like that that come about when you start having a collective impact conversation with people who don't know each other. We found that there are private equity folks who really want to invest, and they're motivated by their faith community, their faith passion. That's my own personal motivation. In Luke chapter 10, when Jesus told the story of the Good Samaritan that everyone knows, his last 4 words of that story were, "Go and do likewise," right? That's not a recommendation. That's a statement, like, just go do that, right? And so that's what I'm trying to do in the small way that I can. I'm not as far along as Ed is, but we have a coalition. We have a team of 9 folks who are working on this every day, and it's been a great ride so far.
Thank you.
Can I add a word of support?
Yes, you can.
Thank you. The bringing people together that haven't talked about these issues, we ran into. We had these scholarships for the technical college we wanted to give. We went out and advertised in the schools and in the community and stuff like that, and we had nobody applying. We had nobody asking for the scholarships. We had the will and the interest, but it wasn't connected. And the president of the technical school is a retired Navy aviator, so he's kind of we're going to figure this out kind of guy. And he said the smartest thing, and that was, let's go talk to the ministers in Ferguson. So got 7 ministers in Ferguson together for lunch, and he and I went, the president of the school went and sat and said, here's the program, here's what's going on, what are we missing? What are we not doing that needs to be done? And the younger minister in the group said, I don't want to offend you. And Stan, the president's an old white guy too. And we're sitting there and he goes, I don't want to offend you, but do you know what a gang is? I said, well, yeah, I grew up on the south side of Chicago, south suburb of Chicago. I know what a gang is. What are you talking about? And Stan goes, oh, I was in the Navy for 30 years. I know what a gang is. Very, very good. Do you know anything about gangs here? And it turns out there's a very important gang in Ferguson that's been around for a long time. And where Rankin Technical Colleges is in North St. Louis, a different neighborhood, another very important gang. And if you're a mother in Ferguson, you are raising your children to be safe. And one of the things you're teaching your children is where can you go in our community where you'll be safe, and where can you go where you will have problems. And if you're in Ferguson, you are raised by your mother to know to not go to North St. Louis.
Wow.
Because if you do, there's going to be trouble. And Stan and I are sitting there going, oh my God, what have we done? So then we invited the ministers to Rankin in North St. Louis and said, wait a minute, come with us. When was the last time you were in North St. Louis? And they go, well, we don't go to North St. Louis. And so we took them to North St. Louis, which is 5 miles away. And they saw what we were doing, and At the end of that, they said, we will help you. And then the phone started ringing. And now there's 234 kids through that program, through Ferguson, identified by the ministers to get in the program. But without that conversation that you're talking about, we didn't have a clue. We had a will, but we were stupid.
Well, you weren't stupid. You just didn't know. And by the way, they also didn't know what was going on in North St. Louis and how it had changed. So it was misperceptions. And if we don't communicate, we also then have to figure out a way to get over that barrier, right? Whatever it is. I want to circle back to Margaret and Congressman Roskam on an issue around keeping the wealth in communities. Dave and Ed talked about it a little bit, but it's a real issue. So you touched on Harlem, and there's a huge concern about displacement in Harlem. We're dealing with it here in Chicago as we have neighborhoods that are starting to improve. There's a real concern around displacement, that the wealth that you're going to create is not going to benefit people in the community, and in fact, will end up displacing them. So if you could talk a little bit, both of you, I'll start with you, Congressman Roskam, about ways that the rules and the program can be implemented to avoid that. And Margaret, as you're thinking through the investments that you all are doing, talk a little bit about how you encourage and ensure that wealth stays in the neighborhood and benefits the residents of the community we're trying to improve.
So I'll give you a straight answer to your question. Let me just highlight quickly, just
Sure, go ahead.
part of what you two, the subtext of what you were both just describing was trust in those discussions.
Yes.
So the conversation you had with the pastors, I can just tell by the way you're describing this, they didn't feel like they were getting hustled or manipulated or trotted out for some press release. Right. The fact that a company is willing to open up $500 million worth of supply chain information to you suggests that they trust you too, to not do something that exposes them in some way or puts them in a negative light. And there's a lot of power in that, but there's an intentionality to that as well. Okay, back to you, Counselor.
No, thank you.
So the question that you raised, the danger is real. That is, something new comes in, and so new workers come in and new opportunities come in. What's got to happen, and I'm just sort of thinking about this now, what's got to happen is, without being too prescriptive, these programs need to have the type of culture that you've described, and that is with a level of intentionality to say, how do we go out and weave in community members? Now, there's a temptation. Federal government's really good at doing two things: nothing and overreacting. That's the way it goes. So what we've got to do is, with some nimbleness here, and I'm not convinced that it's necessarily a federal statute that's the remedy, or even a promulgated rule from Treasury or the IRS, but instead a culture, where we say, look, this is the expectation. So, not to lay it on Goldman's feet, but you got big shoulders. The ability for those who are guiding these things to say, look, here's kind of, this is the protocol for these next steps. So, but you've flagged it in a way that is making me mindful that we've got to be attentive to this.
Right.
But I'm very wary of some promulgated rule from the Treasury Department, heaven help us, that says you've got to do this, that, and the other thing in terms of procurement and so forth. It's not nimble, it's not clever, and it can be a real buzzkill on the whole thing.
I agree. Margaret?
And I was just going to say, sorry not to be a copycat, just one thing on just
please,
the
go
earlier
ahead.
conversation, because I talked a lot about sort of local stakeholders. In our work, the faith-based community has been some of our most incredible local stakeholders, and it ties into a little bit what you said about wealth creation. One of the things we're really excited about, we've financed, it's probably about 3,000 or 4,000 units now of low-income home ownership in central Brooklyn, and that came about because a group of churches, they now call themselves sort of the East Brooklyn congregations, came together and went to the city and said, we are sitting on, close to 70 acres of undeveloped land. You need to deed this over to us and actually help us create a program in this neighborhood to create home ownership. And one of the really exciting things about this was during the foreclosure crisis, which hit a lot of New York City neighborhoods very, very hard. Out of what was about 3,000 homes, there were 2 or 3 foreclosures. And what that was really about was a real just wraparound program. It wasn't just, hey, build some homes, let's get the city to subsidize it and we'll get private capital. There was, there was counseling, there was, real effort and a wraparound of these families as they took this big step into home ownership. So just, more kudos to the faith-based community. But to your question about, let's call it what it is, sort of fears about gentrification and displacement, I think it's incredibly tricky. I think there are no sort of silver bullet solutions, but what we have seen be productive is, again, very active, and I don't think anything should come from the federal government either on this, but really active local public sector players. So for example, New York City, which has just gotten incredibly expensive, you basically have to be a millionaire to, get half a studio at this point. They passed a few years ago mandatory inclusionary housing. So when you construct new housing in New York City, and basically most of it, 20% of it needs to be restricted for low-income families. And when we work with local not-for-profits, when we're doing development in new neighborhoods, we talk about what are the needs. We do some developments on the housing side that are 100% market rate. So for example, when we first started investing in Newark, New Jersey, there was not a single new unit of new construction housing built in the downtown of Newark from 1967 till 2010. Wow. Well, that's absurd. So the need there, it wasn't very expensive. The need there wasn't, thousands of units of affordable housing. The issue there was quality housing. So a lot of the work we've done there has been 100% market rate. But then if you look at some of the, the work we're doing in Baltimore, some of the neighborhoods improving, but there's still significant challenges. The work we're doing there, it's 20% affordable. So I think, again, the solutions are not the same in every city, but I do think it does take real local public sector engagement to think about these communities as they change, what the zoning needs to look like, what programs the city then layers on top of whatever benefits are available to the federal government to incentivize the type of development that's appropriate in the life cycle of these neighborhoods. And they certainly change over time, and the needs change.
So my little clock up here, I have a clock up here, it just turned red. It's like orange, it's gonna start flashing in a minute. So we're in our last few seconds, so I'm just gonna let everybody see if they have just a little bit to add as we close. I just wanna say, my point will be a couple things you heard. First of all, intentionality. Mm-hmm. These are tough issues, and you're not just going to plop a program in place. I think everybody you've heard has been very thoughtful about the work that they're doing and very intentional. And the second is a broad range of programming, and one thing is not going to solve every issue that we're talking about. Congressman Roskam, any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I would just say be encouraged. We as Americans are the beneficiaries of a system that is the envy of the world, and it is the envy of history. There is no system, political and economic system, that has created the type of wealth and opportunity that our country has. The challenge that we now have is to make sure that more and more people can be participants in that, and we can clearly do this.
Yeah. Margaret?
I guess my parting thought would be to be engaged. So as Goldman Sachs thinks about the new cities that we're going to be involved in, we don't want to sort of come from on high and think that we understand what the challenges are and what the needs are. And so we're able to partner with organizations like LISC and, and Enterprise and local community boards. And those folks, they need actual residents of these communities to come forward, be engaged, talk about their needs, be part of planning. And everyone should do that. It matters to all of us. And, we won't hear what the needs are unless someone is doing the informing.
Thanks, Dave.
My 2 cents would be that business has a huge role to play in this, and we need more CEOs in Chicago like Ed. And if there's any CEOs in this room or listening to this, I would love to meet with you. If we could get 10 CEOs who want to devote their company to bettering Chicago and still keeping their profits the same, I believe those are not incompatible. Please see me.
Thank you. I think we can help you with that. From World Business Chicago. Ed?
Well, this is a narrow point probably, but industry needs skilled workers.
Yes.
And we'll go to where skilled workers are at. And the thing that's most optimistic to talk about is we now have 6 new manufacturing facilities in North County that we didn't have 3 years ago because we have skilled workers to do the job.
Right. Terrific. Join me in thanking this awesome panel. and the inspiration they provided. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you so much. Thank you all. Vision. Without vision, the people perish. We need a vision for our communities, a vision for our business leaders, a vision for our families. Getting capital into distressed communities is bringing opportunity, and we are really excited to have another group of young people, and we all know how much young people mean to us. They are going to lead us into the future, and so we're going to have Kids Science Labs come out in just a moment, but I want to explain to you how this came to be. Todd and Sylvie Ricketts asked us to come here to Chicago, as you heard earlier today. And when they did, they said, Jimmy, why don't you come down? We'll go down to the south side and take you to Pastor Corey Brooks' church down on the south side of Chicago, and we'll meet with a bunch of folks and start hearing what's going on. Well, one of the guys who came is Damian Howard with a group called Clever Characters. And we got some Damian Howard fans over here. Clever Characters has a booth over here. You're about to meet Damian, but you're also about to meet Keith Norsom and Shagan Campbell. Shagan and Keith are with Kids Science Labs. And because of the community meetings that started with Pastor Brooks and then continued because Alvin Bibbs brought us back to Chicago 2 more times, and the folks who we met at Brooks's Project Hood and Alvin Bibbs and Together Chicago, we started making, look, I didn't do anything. I just showed up and we were convening some great folks, and Damian, well, I need to mention this. So Google is one of our sponsors, and Google, in preparation for this, told us about Kids Science Labs. So we hear about Kids Science Labs, and we told Damian, Kids Science Labs needs some kids from challenged communities, and Damian has Clever Characters, which is doing its work. You're about to hear all of that, but what is so gratifying is not just having wonderful people come up and speak and share their encouraging messages, but seeing actual outcomes. And you're about to hear about a collaboration. I'll get out of the, oh, look at the block is there. I think we planned that. I was probably supposed to point it out earlier. This is a collaboration that has grown out of this endeavor to bring the Kemp Forum on expanding opportunity here to Chicago. So please welcome Kids Science Labs and Clever Characters, Keith, Shagan, and Damian. Come on out. Thanks so much, Shagan. Thanks, Damian. Thank you. Thank you.
Let's get some stuff out. We got this stuff. We got the sticky phone.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Glad to hear you. My name is Shagan from Kids Science Labs, and I'm here to tell you a little bit of a story.
We got the tape.
So a few years ago, actually about 8 years ago, my wife, Keith's wife, we were pregnant with our second child. Keith was about to have 2 kids. I was going to have 2 kids, and we thought, great time to start a business, quit our jobs, be entrepreneurs, start a business. And we were talking about problems that existed in our community, and there was this concept, this idea that we thought kids are brilliant. Every time you ask them a question, they have an answer. They can figure just about everything out. Why is it that kids are so inspired learners, but by the time they get to 5th grade, they don't really enjoy science? It just didn't make sense. They're naturally gifted problem solvers, so why aren't they engaged in science? So we looked around and we tried to figure out, why does this problem not have a solution? Right? If you want to learn art, you can go to an art school. If you want to learn gymnastics, you can do gymnastics. But if you want to learn art, want to learn science, everyone said go to a museum. We just thought, that doesn't make any sense. There should be a place that's creative that teaches kids all about science. And at KSL, that is something that we do each and every day. Our mission is, through hands-on science, problem solving, and creative design, we want to enable the next generation of creative thinkers and leaders around Chicago, around the country. We've built 5 retail centers, 4 of which are in Chicago, and each and every day we have a chance to engage kids with real science. Backstage, we were asking kids some questions, and they wanted to know, why do you have to get your tonsils out? Are you more healthy if you're a big bodybuilder with massive muscles? Things that are like real interesting dialogue, and we want to have a place where they can come and they can engage. Because mistakes are incredibly valuable, and a child's capacity to learn is relatively unlimited. When we think about what we do at Kid Science Labs, our business is based on 5 basic facts. Every parent is the same, regardless of socioeconomic status. You want your kid to have a better opportunity than you do. You want your child to have a chance to outperform. One of the principles that is true is early intervention with kids, starting at age 1, 2, and 3. Early childhood education provides an ample opportunity to build neuroplasticity in young minds. And we just thought that's where we want to live. We want to build a space where every day all we do is engage those young children, and parents are busy, and we want people to help us. Schools, they love being able to teach, but they sometimes need help, in particular with science. And we wanted to be in a position where each and every day we had great teachers, we had a great learning environment, and we had a program that would work to engage young kids. It started here in Chicago in Lincoln Park back in 2011. When you think about why we exist, and we talk about science all the time, picture a 3,000 square foot retail center all around the city. There's lots of them. We have 4 now, but we're going to have 20 in Chicago, where kids come during the day who are preschool age. They come after school when they're done with school, and they come on the weekends, and they take a class that is science each and every day. If you look at one of the challenges we have, the number of careers in science engineering is growing rapidly. The number of degreed individuals in engineering has been decreasing rapidly. Those 2 things do not make any sense. Science is a child's #1 desired discipline. #1. The only thing that beats it is playing outside, because it's the discipline of actually doing stuff. Kids need help, and there's an achievement gap in our students, and it starts really, really early. At KSL, we've been doing science for the last 7 years. This is our 8th year in business. We actually see 100,000 students a year at Kid Science Labs, based right here in Chicago. We have 20,000 kids that come and visit us for a hands-on science experience as a field trip. We dissect everything from hearts to showing kids how to make new bubble solution. Kids are curious, they're engaged, and we want to be in a position where we can impact them each and every day. We've self-funded $250,000 of scholarships on our own. We don't take any government money. Our business is self-sustaining, but we're one of many businesses that do fantastic work with students in and around Chicago. I'm gonna bring up my friend here, Damian, to come and talk a little bit about clever characters.
There you go. There you go. You're going to do them on the top, too?
Hello, everybody. So I am Damian Howard. I'm so elated to be here. I always forget to do this, so I just want to shout out my wife, who's also in the room. Hey, baby girl. Had to do that. All right, so our purpose statement, why we exist because it's 12 years in the education sector. I've noticed that kindergarten through 12th grade, a lot of our kids are disengaged in the classroom environment. So we actually do the work of pushing into 5 schools right now, going in and making social and emotional learning, character development, life skills exciting for kids and accessible for teachers, so that they can implement the work that we're doing, the language and our process, into their curriculum. And what we're finding as we go into the elementary school settings, you all see kind of Elpie the elephant on one of these pictures here, hence the word clever character. Sometimes we take these costume characters in the schools to really engage these kids and get them excited about the work. What we're finding, and these are 2 elementary settings that we engage with on a weekly basis. Again, we have 5 different schools that we're a part of. In the elementary schools, qualitative results already are showing that kids are increasing and improving their behaviors just based off of the only experimental thing the intervention introduced to them as this social and emotional learning work with these character development skills. I'm really excited as well about the work that we are doing on the high school level. I just got to shout out 2 of the young people who are over here at the table doing their science. Kavina, shout out, can y'all clap it up for our young people that's over here? So Kavina is a sophomore at Crane High School. Not Crane High School, she's at Phillips High School. Y'all can still hear me, right? So y'all hear me, right? It felt like this went out. She's a sophomore at Phillips High School. And when we started working at Phillips High School, going there on a weekly basis, we're seeing their grades increase and improve on a weekly basis since we started this for 2 consistent months, all right? And yeah, just excited about that work. I have to move on. Alexia is from Crane. Shout out to Alexia, everybody. Started working with Alexia and her group in 2016. And since we've been working with them in that 1 year, all of them started off with less than a 3.0 GPA. And just based off of, again, character development, social and emotional skills, they increased their GPAs by 12%, which equated to 0.28 points. Let's clap it up for that. And this is why we're clapping now. These young people now have access to other colleges that maybe they didn't have access to before, access to additional resources on the college level that maybe they didn't have access to before. And again, one of the only experimental things or interventions that was introduced to them is this Clever Characters social and emotional learning work. And that's some of the data that I just spoke to right there, the results from the work that we've done that we did thus far. So 2018, 2019. I already stated we're in 5 schools. We have desire and hope, and hopefully these conversations that we're having today could help us in this way to push into 15 schools going into the next school year. And we believe without any doubt, I didn't state this earlier, that this work will be a part of urban education reform. We've heard this spoken of. Some people want to clap for that. Let's do it. Let's do it. Let's do it. Because I've seen over the 12 years that there is some brokenness there, and I believe as we go in and we give these young people life skills, what some people call soft or non-cognitive, I believe it's absolutely cognitive, that it's going to increase those grades, it's going to continue to increase their behavior, and also give them self-esteem, a sense of identity that maybe they didn't have before. So thank you all for your time. Keith is going to join us here and talk a little bit more about the collaboration between our organizations.
All right, can you all hear me? All right, great. So I get the privilege of talking about how 2 really great organizations are working together already. Now, you all are looking at this video and going, what the heck are they all doing at that table? We actually, in the back today, wanted to give you an idea of what we do every day. And what we did in the back as a group is we did ACL surgery. And you all say, that's crazy. How can you do ACL surgery with kids as young as 4? Well, we do. And we do it with everyday materials. And what's very interesting is we can make a knee. And we can talk about how our knees work. And our knees are so cool because we've all heard that Steph Curry had an MCL injury. We've all seen that Kyle Schwarber tore his knee up in baseball last year. But how does it get fixed? That is an interesting question. And that's a question not only are we interested in, but kids are interested in. And if you take that question and you explore it a little bit, something very cool happens. So we all have made and are continuing to enhance our legs. And we have a picture so you can see a little bit better on the screen of what we created. Now, what is interesting about this is today, what you're seeing is just the start of how our 2 organizations are working together. Because it's great that some kids have access to what we do, but Shagan and I did not start KSL so that there would be 5 centers in the U.S. We started it so that there would be centers all over, so that kids all over could have access, because kids are fundamentally curious. And they need an environment to be able to explore. They deserve an environment to be able to explore. So, after today, we are doing a number of things together. We actually have some of them already in progress. We are going to have kids come to our center because the experience matters. We all, as kids, as adults, remember those special experiences in our lives, and that is one of the things, one of the great benefits for our centers, because they are unique. They are unusual. We've got plywood. We've got shipping containers in our center. It doesn't make any sense that you can write on the walls. That is part of the experience, and that is intriguing. And that's what we're all going to do together. We're also going to do a number of field trips. And we are also, for some of our high school students, which is an area where we don't have as much programming, we have kids that come in, and they undergo what we call a summer apprenticeship. So they are not only learning the science, but they are helping us teach the science and helping mentor younger kids. And that's very exciting. So I want to leave you all with a thought. about the importance of what we do. And that thought is that we talked a lot today about problems and how we solve problems and how we can solve them on small and large scales. Well, fundamentally, kids are curious. We all know that. It doesn't change your location if you're curious or not. What matters is that we give them the environment and the opportunity to engage in that curiosity. And that's what we hope to do today, and that's what we hope to do for the next 20 years.